The 7-year-old boy stumbled out of the classroom, his torn shoes slipping on the polished floor as tears streamed down his face, mixing with the blood from his split lip. The other kids had been especially cruel today, mocking his unwashed clothes, his empty lunchbox, his mother who never came to school events, but as he ran toward the exit, hoping to disappear forever, a voice called out from the hallway, "Lucas, wait," and what happened next would not only change his life, but reveal a secret about his past that no one could have imagined. Before we share this extraordinary story, if you believe every child deserves someone who sees their worth, please subscribe to our channel. Lucas had always been different, but he was about to discover just how special he really was. Lucas froze at the sound of his name, his small body trembling not from cold, though the October wind cut through his threadbare jacket, but from fear that someone had witnessed his humiliation, that his shame would spread even further through Riverside. Elementary's voice belonged to Ms. Chen, the school janitor, who most kids ignored as she pushed her cleaning cart through the halls, but Lucas had always noticed how she sometimes left extra crackers on the cafeteria tables when she cleaned, how she hummed Chinese melodies while mopping, how her eyes held kindness. "Lucas, please wait," she said again, moving toward him with surprising grace for someone her age, and Lucas saw something in her face that made him pause, not pity, which he hated, but understanding. As if she knew exactly what it felt like to be invisible, he wiped his nose with his sleeve, leaving a streak of blood and snot on the fabric that was already stained from too many washes in the bathroom sink at home. His stomach growled, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since yesterday lunch, when Ms. Chen had accidentally dropped a wrapped sandwich near his hiding spot. "You cannot go home like this," she said gently, reaching into her cart for clean paper towels. "Come, I have something to show you, something that might help." And Lucas found himself following her, not because he trusted adults. They had proven unreliable, but because he had nowhere else to go. He walked past empty classrooms where teachers graded papers and planned lessons that Lucas could master in minutes, if anyone bothered to notice, past the gymnasium where Tyler Richardson and his friends practiced basketball, with equipment that cost more than Lucas's mother made in a month if she worked at Alms. Chen led him to a door marked janitor storage that Lucas had passed 1,000 times without thought, but when she opened it he gasped, because inside was not the cluttered closet he expected, but a small cozy space with a lamp, a tiny refrigerator, and shelves lined with books. "This is my special place," she said, closing the door behind them, "where I come when the world is too much, and now it can be yours too, when you need it." And Lucas felt tears, fresh ones, not from pain but from the overwhelming kindness of being seen, being offered sanctuary. She guided him to a small chair and began cleaning his split lip with gentle efficiency. While Lucas looked around at the miraculous space, there were advanced mathematics texts next to ancient poetry collections, science journals, Basai-worn fairy tales, and on one wall photographs of people he didn't recognize. Own photo drew his attention, a young Chinese woman standing next to another woman who looked oddly familiar, though Lucas couldn't place her. They were both wearing lab coats, holding some kind of award and smiling like they had conquered the world together. "Thought was many years ago," Ms. Chen said, following his gaze, "when your grandmother and I were going to change the world with our inventions before everything changed." And Lucas's head snapped up because no one had ever mentioned his grandmother. "You knew her," he whispered, and Ms. Chen nodded, slowly settling into the other chair with a sigh that carried decades of untold stories. "Elizabeth Yang was my best friend, my research partner, my sister in all but blood, and I made her a promise before she died." Lucas's mind raced with questions, but his stomach chose that moment to growl loudly, and Miss Chen smiled, opening the small refrigerator to pull out a container of soup. She heated it in a microwave. He hadn't noticed, and soon the small space filled with the scent of ginger and vegetable. "Seat first," she said, handing him the warm bowl, "then we talk." And Lucas ate slowly, partly to savor the first hot meal he'd had in days, partly because he was afraid that when he finished this dream would end, and he'd be back in his cold apartment with his mother passed out on the couch. "When did you meet her?" he asked between spoonfuls, and Ms. Chen leaned back, her eyes distant. "We were graduate students. Both outsiders, she for being a single mother in the sciences, I for being Chinese in America. But together we were unstoppably." Told him stories as he ate about late nights in the lab, about breakthrough discoveries, about patents filed, and dreams of fortune, not for themselves but for their children. "Your mother was just a baby then," Ms. Chen said, "and we thought we were building her a better future, but something had gone wrong." Lucas knew that much. His mother never talked about the past, except when she was high, and then her rambling made no sense, but he'd pieced together fragments. Grandmother died when his mother was 20. He was born 2 years later, father unknown, or at least unmentioned, soup bowl empty. Now Lucas set it aside and asked the question that had haunted him since he was old enough to understand their situation. What happened? Why are we so poor if grandmother was a scientist? Why does mom hate her life? So Ms. Chen's face darkened, and she stood moving to the bookshelf to pull out a thick folder. "Lucas, This is not an easy story, but you are old enough to know and smart enough, I think, to understand that. Sometimes the world takes from those who create and gives to those who steals. Opened the folder revealing newspaper clippings, patent documents, legal papers that meant nothing to Lucas except for the repeated appearance of his grandmother's name, Elizabeth Yang, and another name that made his blood run cold. Richardson Industries, Tyler's family's company. He stole everything, Miss Chen said quietly. Every patent, every innovation, every dream. Your grandmother fought them in court for years. Spent everything she had, but they had better lawyers, bigger lies, and in the end, she died of a broken heart, leaving your mother with nothing but bitterness. Lucas stared at the papers, understanding flooding through him like ice water. Tyler Richardson tormented him every day, and now he knew why. The Richardson family had built their empire on his grandmother's genius while he wore shoes held together with duct tape. But he survived, Lucas said, looking at Ms. Chen, and she smiled sadly. I survived. By becoming invisible? By taking this job where no one looks at the janitor? Where I could watch over your mother and then you keeping my promise to Elizabeth, even when your mother refused my help. Reached out and gently touched his face, where the bruise was already forming. You have her mind, Lucas. I see it in how you solve problems when you think no one is watching. How you read books meant for children twice your age. How you understand things without being taught. Lucas felt exposed. Like she could see through his careful performance of stupidity. The way he deliberately got B's and C's to avoid attention. The way he pretended to struggle with assignments he could complete in seconds. The way he made himself small and dumb too. Survive we hide it, she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew, and Lucas shrugged, looking at his torn shoes. Because smart poor kids are targets, he said. Because foster care is worse than a drunk mother. Because being invisible is safer than being specials. Chen nodded, understanding in her eyes, but then she smiled and pulled out another folder. This one newer safe has kept you alive, but it will not give you a life. There is a test coming for the Whitmore Academy full scholarship for gifted students, and you are going to take it. Lucas shook his head. Immediately, Whitmore was where rich kids went. Kids like Tyler, kids with tutors and test prep and parents who drove Mercedes. He'd be eaten alive. They're just like here, only worse. Because the fall would be farther. Not as Lucas Chen, she said firmly, as Lucas Yang, Elizabeth's grandson, and when they see what you can do when I teach you, what I know when we show them the mind you've been hiding, they will have no choice but to accept. You showed him the practice tests, and Lucas's eyes widened at questions that actually challenged him, math that made him think, science that excited him, essay prompts that begged for the thoughts he'd kept locked inside for so long. Tyler, he started, and Ms. Chen's eyes flashed with something fierce. Tyler Richardson is a small bully in a big world, and his father's empire is built on sand. When you are strong enough, we will shake that sand and see what false Lucas wanted to believe. Her wanted to imagine a world where he wasn't hungry and scared and alone, but 7 years of survival had taught him hope was dangerous. Still, his grandmother had been real, had been brilliant, had been stolen from, and that was more history than he'd ever had. He'll think about it, he said, and Ms. Chen smiled, knowing it was the best she'd get for now. She packed him a bag of food supplies to hide in his backpack, and showed him how to lock the door from inside if he ever needed the sanctuary. When she wasn't there as he prepared to leave, she called him back. Lucas, your mother. She is sick, not evil, broken, not cruel, and if you can forgive her even a little, it will free you more than any scholarship. And Lucas nodded, though forgiveness seemed as foreign as Algebra 2 kindergarten. He walked home through streets that felt different now, knowing his grandmother had once walked them with dreams. Knowing Miss Chen was watching over him, knowing that tomorrow he could return to the sanctuary and begin learning what he'd always pretended not to know. The apartment was as he'd left it, dark, cold, his mother unconscious on the couch. But Lucas felt different. He carefully hid the food Ms. Chen had given him, did his homework by candlelight. When the electricity was cut off, and fell asleep thinking about patents and his dreams. His grandmother stood in a lab coat holding his hand, and Ms. Chen was there too, and they were all working together on something beautiful, something that would change the world, something that no one could steal because it lived in his mind. The sanctuary transformed Lucas's world in ways he couldn't have imagined. Every afternoon, while other kids went to soccer, practice, or piano lessons, he slipped into the janitor's closet, where Ms. Chen had created a universe of learning that belonged only to them. She started with mathematics, not the basic arithmetic Mrs. Patterson droned through, but real mathematics, the kind that made patterns dance in his mind. Fibonacci sequences that appeared in flower petals, probability theory that explained why his mother's scratch-off tickets never won, calculus that described the curve of water from a fountain. You understand so quickly, Ms. Chen marveled as Lucas solved problems meant for high school students just like Elizabeth. She would see connections where others saw only numbers, and Lucas felt pride warm his chest like soup on an empty stomach. Between lessons, she fed him not just food though. There was always something hot in the tiny refrigerator, but stories about his grandmother, how she'd come to America with nothing but brilliance, how she'd worked 3 jobs while earning her doctorate, how she'd met Miss Chen in a physics class where they were the only women. Her grandmother could make anyone believe in impossible things, Miss Chen said one afternoon while Lucas worked through quantum mechanics basics. She convinced me, a shy girl from Beijing, that we could patent our ideas. Start a company? Change how solar energy worked, and you did, Lucas said, looking up from his equations. At least you tried, and Ms. Chen's face clouded the way it always did when they approached the painful parts of the story. Yes. We tried, we succeeded even, and then James Richardson, Tyler's father, decided our success belonged to him, she showed Lucas the patent documents again, this time explaining the technical aspects. How his grandmother's innovations in photovoltaic cells could have revolutionized clean energy, how the prototypes they'd built in a garage had caught the attention of investors. And rivals Alicaric Carson Industries offered to buy us out, Ms. Chen continued. When we refused, they offered partnership. When we refused, that they simply took hiring away our employees, stealing our designs, filing nearly identical patents weeks after hours, claiming independent developmental. Ha's hands clenched around his pencil. How could they do that, he asked, and Ms. Chen smiled bitterly because justice is expensive, Lucas, and they had deeper pockets. Your grandmother spent everything fighting them lawyers, appeals, investigations, but money beats truth in America. Worst part, she added, was watching what it did to your mother. Angela was 17 when the legal battle started. A brilliant girl who'd already been accepted to MIT, but as the money disappeared, as Elizabeth worked longer hours, as the stress mounted, Angela turned to other escapes, drugs, Lucas said flatly, because he'd lived with the aftermath his whole life. And Ms. Chen nodded. Started with pills for anxiety, then stronger things. When those stopped working, by the time Elizabeth died, Angela was lost to us, and pregnant with you. Lucas had always wondered about his father, but Ms. Chen had no answers. Angela never said, and Elizabeth died before you were born. But you must understand, Lucas, your mother loved you, once fought to keep you, even when everyone said adoption would be better. Room felt smaller when they talked about his mother, so Ms. Chen would redirect to lessons. She taught him Chinese characters, showing how pictographs evolved into meaning. She explained scientific concepts through experiments they could perform with household items. She pushed him through literature that would challenge college students, but it was the test preparation that consumed most of their time. The Whitmore Academy Scholarship Exam was legendary, designed to find exceptional minds among the poor, giving one full ride each year to a student who could prove they belonged among the elite thousands. Apply, Ms. Chen explained. Only 100 are invited to test, and only one wins. But Lucas, this test, it's not about memorization, it's about thinking creatively, solving problems that have no clear answers, showing not just what you know, but how your mind works. Gave him past exams to study, and Lucas devoured them, puzzling through logic problems that twisted back on themselves, essay questions that demanded original thought, mathematical proofs that required intuitive leaps rather than rote formula. A month of preparation, Lucas was solving problems faster than Ms. Chen could grade them, but she warned him repeatedly that knowledge alone wouldn't be enough. You must also learn to show your work, she said, to let them see your thought process brilliance. Hidden helps no one. This was harder than any equation because Lucas had spent years training himself to hide, to make stupid mistakes on purpose, to fumble with simple concepts, to never let anyone see the calculations that flowed like water through his Minden afternoon. Tyler Richardson followed him. Lucas didn't notice, focused on the chemical equations Ms. Chen had given him to memorize, until Tyler's voice cut through his concentration. Hey, trash boy, where do you disappear to every day? Lucas's blood froze, but he kept walking, forcing his face into the dull expression that had protected him for years. Nowhere, he mumbled. Just walking around. And Tyler grabbed his backpack, yanking him backwardly. Tyler said, I've seen you sneaking around, going places you shouldn't be. And Lucas remembered Ms. Chen's lessons about chemical reactions, how the right catalyst could change everything, how sometimes you had to control the reaction to prevent explosion. Just doing extra janitor work, he said, making his voice slow and stupid. Ms. Chen pays me $1 to help clean classrooms. Mom needs the money. And he watched Tyler process this, saw the rich boy's disgust at the idea of working for dollars. Tyler shoved him, but it was dismissive now, not investigative. Whatever, trash boy, just remember your place and stay out of mine. And he walked away, leaving Lucas trembling, not from fear, but from the effort of maintaining his mask on. He told Ms. Chen she increased their security measures, gave him different routes to reach the sanctuary, varied their meeting times, but she also said something that stayed with him. Let him believe you're stupid, Lucas. It's armor, he can't. Persethi. Weeks passed in a blur of learning, and Lucas felt his mind expanding like a muscle finally allowed to stretch. He read voraciously, worked problems until his head ached, wrote essays that poured out thoughts he'd never dared voice before. Chen submitted his scholarship application in secret, using her address, instead of his forging his mother's signature with practiced ease from years of helping with school forms. And they waited for the invitation that would change everything or nothing. During this time, Lucas noticed changes in his daily life. Ms. Chen had somehow arranged for his clothes to be cleaner, found a way to patch his shoes without him knowing, left food in places he would find it, and slowly he looked less like a target. Merce Patterson still ignored him, but now Lucas understood it differently. She wasn't mean, just overwhelmed, tired of teaching kids who didn't want to learn, couldn't see the one student desperate for more, and he found he could forgive her limited vision. Evan Tyler's bullying felt different now that Lucas knew the source of the Richardson wealth. Every shove was a reminder of Patton's stolen, every insult an echo of his grandmother's fight, and instead of shrinking, Lucas stored it all as fuel for the future. One evening, Ms. Chen showed him something new, a notebook in his grandmother's handwriting filled with ideas that had never been developed: solar paint that could turn any surface into energy capture, water purification systems that used algae, battery technology that seemed impossible. She never patented these, Ms. Chen said, kept them hidden after Richardson destroyed her. But Lucas looked at this date 3 days before she died as if she knew, as if she was leaving them for someone, and Lucas traced the equations, feeling connected across time. Could work, he asked, and Ms. Chen smiled. Oh, Lucas, they're brilliant. Even now, 20 years later, some of these ideas are ahead of current technology, but they would need someone who understood both the science and the vision, someone like Simeon, like me, Lucas finished. And for the first time since his grandmother died, Ms. Chen saw Elizabeth's confident smile reflected in this small boy who'd been hiding his light under years of poverty and neglect. At night, Lucas went home to find his mother coherent, for once staring at an old photo album he'd never seen. She looked up when he entered, and for a moment her eyes cleared. Lucas, she said, baby, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry for everything. Sat beside her carefully, and she showed him pictures. His grandmother, young and brilliant, his mother as a child, happy and loved, and there in one photo, Ms. Chen, decades younger, standing with them like family before Richardson destroyed it. Alsh was going to change the world, his mother whispered, and I was going to help her. We had such plans, Lucas, such dreams, but they took it all, and I wasn't strong enough to fight back. Wasn't strong like her, like you could have been, Mum, Lucas said gently. I am strong, and I am fighting back. And she looked at him with eyes that flickered between pride and fear, because she knew what fighting Richardson had cost before. Next morning, a letter arrived at Ms. Chen's address, addressed to Lucas Yang, regarding the Whitmore Academy scholarship examination, and as Ms. Chen opened it with trembling hands, Lucas felt the ghost of his grandmother standing with them. Congratulations, the letter read. You have been selected to sit for the examination based on your exceptional application. Please present yourself at Whitmore Academy on November 15th. Formal dress required, and Lucas laughed at the last line, because formal to him meant shoes without holes. The morning of November 15th arrived, wrapped in frost and anxiety. Lucas stood before the cracked mirror in his bathroom, wearing the only decent clothes. Ms. Chen had managed to assemble a white shirt from Goodwill, pressed until it looked almost new, dark pants that were only slightly too long, borrowed dress shoes that pinched but didn't have. Alicia's mother had been sober for 3 days, a minor miracle that Lucas didn't trust but appreciated. She stood in the doorway watching him with eyes that kept sliding between clarity and confusion. You look like her, she said suddenly, when she was young before everything. Lucas turned to face her, and Angela Yang, the woman who'd once been MIT bound, reached out with shaking hands to smooth his collar. I remember when she took her big test, she said, the one that got her into graduate school. She was so nervous, she threw up twice, but she passed, Lucas said, and his mother nodded. Passed with the highest score they'd ever seen. Richardson himself came to recruit her. That's how it started, how he first saw what she could do, how he decided he wanted it for himself. Bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to cut, but Lucas heard something else underneath. Pride. His mother was proud of his grandmother, proud of what she'd achieved before it was stolen, and maybe, just maybe, proud of him for triumphs. Chen arrived in her ancient Honda Civic, having taken a personal day to drive him to Whitmore Academy on the other side of the city, where glass buildings reached towards sky, and even the trees looked expensive. She handed him a paper bag with breakfast and a thermos of terramemba, she said as they drove through neighborhoods that shifted from poverty to prosperity. Everything you've learned is already in your mind. Don't try to impress them, just let them see how you think. And Lucas nodded, though his stomach churned with more than hunger. Whitmore Academy looked like a castle crossed with a spaceship, all modern angles and old money confidence. The parking lot filled with cars that cost more than his apartment building, and parents who wore watches worth more than his mother had ever earned. Lucas felt himself shrinking, but Ms. Chen placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Elizabeth Yang's grandson, she said firmly, you belong here more than any Richardson ever will. And Lucas straightened his spine, remembering whose mind he'd inherited inside the testing center. Marble floors reflected fluorescent lights, and 99 other scholarship candidates waited in various states of nervousness. Some had parents hovering with last-minute advice, others sat alone, but all of them looked more polished than Lucas found his assigned seat, trying not to stare at the Whitmore students who had come to watch the poor kids compete for their entertainment. Tyler Richardson wasn't among them, thank God, but his friends were whispering and pointing at the scholarship candidates like they were animals in a zoo. Tess Proctor, a severe woman with silver hair and piercing eyes, explained the rules: 8 hours, 6 sections, no calculators for the mathematics portion. One essay to be completed last, and Lucas noticed several candidates pale at the restrictions, but Miss Chen had prepared him for this, had made him solve complex equations in his head. WRITE, essays by candlelight when the power was cut, work through problems while she created distractions to simulate test conditions, and Lucas felt his nervousness transform into focused. First section was logic puzzles, patterns that twisted and folded back on themselves. Sequences that required intuitive leaps rather than memorization, and Lucas let his mind relax into the flow, seeing connections that bloomed. Like his grandmother's equations around him, he heard pencils scratching frustrated sighs. The rustle of paper as candidates flipped back and forth between problems, but Lucas worked steadily, methodically, showing each step of his reasoning the way. Ms. Chen had taught him, letting the test readers see his thoughts on failed math. A mix came next, and without a calculator, most candidates struggled with the complex calculations, but Lucas had been doing math in his head since he was 4, hiding his abilities, making change for his mother when she was too high to count, and these problems were puzzles, not obstacles. Finished the section early and used the extra time to check his work, adding notes in the margins about alternative solution methods, about how certain problems connected to real-world applications, about the beauty he found in numbers that others feared. Lunch was provided in a separate room where candidates clustered in nervous groups, discussing the morning sections. Lucas sat alone, eating the sandwich slowly, listening to others panic about problems he'd found elementary, and felt the familiar urge to make himself smaller bit. Then he remembered his grandmother, facing down Richardson Industries alone. Remembered Ms. Chen, keeping a 20-year promise. Remembered his mother's wasted brilliance, and decided that today he would not hide. Today he would show them everything. The afternoon brought science and literature sections that wove together, requiring candidates to analyze poetry through the lens of physics, to explain chemical reactions using metaphors, to bridge disciplines in ways that traditional education rarely allowed. Lucas wrote about entropy in Shakespeare, about the conservation of energy in human relationships, about how his grandmother's solar cells captured light the way poets captured truth, and felt his authentic voice emerging onto paper for the first time. Other candidates were struggling now. He could see it in their body language, the way they gripped their pencils, the desperate flipping through test booklets, searching for easier questions, and Lucas understood why this test wasn't about knowledge alone, but about mental endurance. The final section was the essay, one question that would determine everything. Describe a problem you've observed and propose an innovative solution, showing both theoretical understanding and practical application. And Lucas stared at the prompt, feeling the weight of possibility. I could write about poverty, about education, about any safe topic that would show intelligence without revealing too much. But then he thought about his grandmother's hidden notebooks, about ideas that could still change the world, about Tyler Richardson sitting in some mansion built on stolen dreams. Lucas wrote about energy inequality, about how the poor paid more for electricity they could barely afford while the rich wasted power. Without thought, he proposed a modified version of his grandmother's solar paint, simplified but still revolutionary, that could turn any surface into free energy. Wrote about the science behind it, photovoltaic cells reduced to nanoparticles suspended in weather-resistant polymer, about the economics of production and distribution, about the social justice of democratizing power generation, and felt his grandmother's spirit guiding his pen. But he was careful not to reveal everything, kept the most advanced equations hidden, changed key components enough that no one could steal this idea the way they'd stolen before. And in his conclusion, he wrote about inheritance, not of money but of visiante. Proctor called time, and Lucas set down his pencil, surprised to find his hand cramping from 8 hours of intense work around him. Candidates looked exhausted, defeated, some were crying, and he understood, because this test had demanded everything they had. As they filed out, parents rushed to meet their children, asking how it went, offering comfort or criticism. But Lucas walked alone until he saw Ms. Chen waiting by the entrance, her face carefully neutral until she saw his small smile while she asked, and Lucas nodded. I showed them, he said quietly. I showed them how my mind works, how her mind worked. And Ms. Chen pulled him into a fierce hug that smelled like cleaning supplies and safety. On the drive home, she asked about each section, and Lucas recounted the problems, the solutions, the essay that had poured out of him like water breaking through a dam, and she nodded approvingly at his careful balance of revelation and protection. Did her proud, Ms. Chen said as they pulled up to his apartment building. Elizabeth would be so happy to know her grandson carries on her work, and Lucas felt tears prick his eyes because he'd never had anyone be proud of him before. Inside, his mother was still sober, still waiting, and when Lucas told her about the test, about writing about grandmother's work, about feeling connected across time to the woman they'd both lost, Angela Yang cried for the first time in years. He wasted it. She said, I wasted the mind she gave me, wasted the chances, wasted everything. But you, Lucas, you have another chance. Don't waste it. Please, don't become like me. And Lucas hugged his mother, feeling her bones sharp through thin cloth. Won't he? Promised. But Mom, if I win, if I go to Whitmore, I'll find a way to help you too. Grandmother wouldn't want her daughter left behind, and Angela sobbed harder because forgiveness from a child is the most humbling gift. That night, Lucas lay in bed replaying every question, every answer, every moment of the test, wondering if he'd done enough, if his poverty would show through despite his mind, if the Richardson influence would somehow block him. Even no, but then he remembered the feeling when he'd written about his grandmother's work. the certainty that had flowed through him, the connection to something larger than test scores and scholarships, and he knew that whatever happened he'd honored her memories. Chen had told him results would come in 2 weeks to wonder and worry to maintain. His mask at Riverside Elementary to pretend nothing had changed when everything was hanging in balance waiting for a panel of judges to decide his worth. 2 weeks felt like 2 years. Every day Lucas went through the motions at Riverside Elementary, maintaining his careful performance of mediocrity, while his mind raced with possibilities. What if he'd miscalculated? What if his poverty showed through? Despite his brilliance, what if Richardson influence reached even into scholarship decisions? Chen kept him grounded with routine in their sanctuary. They continued lessons as if nothing had changed, but Lucas noticed she'd added new books, advanced texts on patent law, corporate structure, and intellectual property protection, preparing him for battles beyond academic ones. Your grandmother learned too late that brilliance alone isn't protection, Ms. Chen said one afternoon. You must understand both creation and defense, innovation and litigation, because the Richardsons of this world will always try to take what they cannot create at home. His mother's sobriety lasted 5 days before crumbling. Lucas found her passed out with empty bottles, and felt the familiar weight of disappointment, but now it was tinged with understanding. She'd tried for him, even temporarily, and that meant something. Covered her with a blanket, cleaned up the bottles, and made himself dinner from the supplies Ms. Chen kept stocked in their refrigerator. Poverty had taught him self-sufficiency, but Ms. Chen had taught him he didn't have to be alone and eaten. The 10th day, Tyler's bullying escalated, as if he sensed something changing in Lucas during gym class. He tripped Lucas hard enough to bloody his knee, and when Lucas stood without crying, Tyler's face twisted with frustration. Don't you fight back, Tyler demanded loud enough for everyone to hear. Are you too stupid to get angry, or just too poor to afford feelings? And the class laughed, because that's what they did when Tyler performed cruelty for their entertainment. Chekas looked at Tyler, really looked at him for the first time, seeing past the expensive clothes and cruel smile to the boy, underneath one who'd been given everything, except the ability to create anything, who would spend his life managing stolen victories, never knowing the joy of earning something. Real Becco's fighting you would make me like you, Lucas said quietly, and I'd rather be poor than empty. And the laughter died, because even 7-year-olds recognize truth when it cut deep enough. Tyler's face went red, then white. But Lucas was already walking away. Ms. Patterson should have intervened, but she was reading something at her desk, probably another reminder about budget cuts or standardized test requirements, and Lucas realized she wasn't cruel, just broken by a system that demanded everything while providing nothing. That afternoon, Ms. Chen was waiting with unusual excitement. She'd received a call from Whitmore Academy, not about results but about Lucas's essay. Someone on the review committee wanted clarification about his solar paint proposal, about whether it was purely theoretical or based on actual research. You want to know if you stole it, Ms. Chen said bluntly. If someone fed you the idea because it's too sophisticated for a 7-year-old from Riverside. And Lucas felt anger burn in his chest, because even his brilliance was suspect when wrapped in poverty. But Ms. Chen smiled. This is good, Lucas. It means they're taking it seriously enough to investigate. Means your idea has merit enough to matter, so we're going to send them exactly what they need to see. And she pulled out his grandmother's notebooks. They photographed select pages showing the evolution of Elizabeth Yang's solar research, highlighting dates that predated Richardson's patents by years. They crafted a response that proved Lucas's essay built on family legacy, not plagiarism, and sent it with quiet dignity. Next 3 days passed in anxious waiting. Lucas threw himself into learning Chinese with Ms. Chen, finding comfort in characters that connected him to heritage beyond Riverside's borders. She taught him to write his name in traditional script, explaining how Yang meant sun bright. Positive energy fitting for a family of solar researchers, she said, and Lucas traced the character over and over, feeling connection to ancestors he'd never known, to a culture his mother had abandoned along with everything else when life became too hard to bear. In day 13, Lucas noticed something strange. Tyler Richardson was absent, not sick absent, but pulled from class absent, and during lunch he overheard teachers whispering about lawyers and investigations, about records being subpoenaed, about Richardson Industries facing scrutiny. Chen knew more when he reached the sanctuary. Someone on the Whitmore committee recognized Elizabeth Yang's work in your essay, she said, carefully started asking questions about patents filed 20 years ago, about timing that seemed suspicious, about innovations that appeared from nowhere. Lucas's heart raced. You mean someone believes us? Someone's investigating? And Ms. Chen nodded, but cautioned him this could help or hurt us. Richardson has resources to bury investigations, but if Whitmore wants you badly enough, they might push where others couldn't. That night, Lucas found his mother lucid, again staring at the television where news reports discussed Richardson Industries facing questions about historical patent disputes. She looked at Lucas with eyes that seemed to see him clearly for once. Seated. You do this? She asked, and Lucas shook his head but explained about the essay, about the committee's questions, about how his words might have cracked open a door sealed for 20 years. And his mother smiled, a ghost of the girl who'd once planned to change the world. Shed, be proud, Angela. said your grandmother. She'd love that you're fighting with words and laws instead of fists, using the system that failed her. And Lucas sat beside his mother, feeling closer to her than he had in years. Final day of waiting arrived November 29th, and Lucas couldn't concentrate on anything Ms. Chen had taken. Another personal day waiting by her phone while Lucas pretended to pay attention in class, his mind spinning through possibilities. At exactly 2:30 p.m., the classroom phone rang. Mrs. Patterson answered with her usual harried tone, then her expression changed, looking directly at Lucas with something like shock. "Lucas Yang," she said slowly, "you're needed in the principal's office." Walk down the hallway felt endless, every step echoing with possibility, and Lucas found himself thinking of his grandmother, walking these same halls when she'd volunteered at his mother's school before everything fell apart. Before Richardson destroyed their family, Principal Martinez was waiting with Ms. Chen, who stood by the window trying to appear calm, but Lucas could see her hands shaking slightly. There was another woman there, too professionally dressed, with kind eyes, and a Whitmore Academy pin on her. "Lucas," she said, standing to greet him. "I'm Dr. Sarah Winters from Whitmore's Scholarship Committee, and I wanted to deliver this news personally because your application was extraordinary." And she handed him an envelope with the Whitmore seal. His hands trembled as he opened it, skimming past formal language until he found the words that changed everything. "Congratulations, Lucas Yang. You have been selected as this year's Whitmore Academy full scholarship recipient." And the room seemed to tilt. "But that wasn't all, Dr. Winters continued. "Your essay has prompted a formal investigation into patent disputes from 20 years ago. The similarity to suppressed Yang innovations was too significant to ignore, and while we cannot promise outcomes, we can promise that your grandmother's work will finally receive proper review." Lucas felt tears sliding down his face and didn't care. Ms. Chen crossed the room to embrace him, and even Principal Martinez seemed moved by the moment, but it was Dr. Winters' next words that truly shook him. "We've also been contacted by your mother," she said gently. "She called after seeing the news reports, wants to enter rehabilitation. If you're willing, we can arrange for treatment at a facility that specializes in helping families heal together." Tears came harder now, because this wasn't just about escaping poverty or honoring his grandmother. It was about possibility for his entire family, for healing that seemed impossible, for futures that had been stolen but might still be "We'll provide transitional support," Dr. Winters added, "housing assistance, tutoring to help you adjust, counseling services, and Ms. Chen will be welcome to visit whenever you'd like. We understand that family isn't always blood." Lucas looked at Ms. Chen, who was crying openly now, and saw in her face 20 years of promises kept, of loyalty that transcended obligation, of love that asked nothing in return. "Thank you," he whispered, meaning more than words could capture. When they returned to tell Mrs. Patterson, she stared at Lucas as if seeing him for the first time. 7 years old," she said faintly. "Our scholarship winner is 7 years old," and Lucas saw her reevaluate every interaction, every dismissed moment, every assumption. Words spread quickly through Riverside Elementary, and reactions varied from disbelief to wonder, but Lucas noticed something important. The other poor kids looked at him differently now, not with resentment but with hope. If he could do it, maybe they could too. Lara Richardson returned to school the next day, subdued and carefully avoided Lucas, but during final bell he approached slowly, his usual swagger replaced by uncertainty. "My dad's lawyers are everywhere," he said quietly, "asking about old patents, about your grandma." Waited, saying nothing, and Tyler continued, "She was really that smart. Wasn't she smart enough that my dad had to steal from her?" And Lucas heard something in Tyler's voice he'd never expected: shame, maybe even the beginning of understanding. The transition to Whitmore Academy began with small miracles. Dr. Winters arranged for Lucas and his mother to move into transitional housing, a clean apartment with working electricity and windows that actually closed, where Angela could begin outpatient treatment while Lucas adjusted to his new life. Ms. Chen helped them pack their few belongings, and Lucas watched his mother touch the walls of their old apartment, as if saying goodbye to the person she'd been there, the addict, the failure, the ghost of who she might have been. "This is really happening," Angela kept saying as they loaded boxes into Ms. Chen's Honda. "We're really leaving," and Lucas saw fear mixed with hope in her eyes, because sometimes the cage becomes comfortable even when the door finally opened. Whitmore had sent a preparation packet thick as a dictionary, filled with course descriptions, uniform requirements, and a reading list that would have intimidated college students, but Lucas devoured it, memorizing the campus map, plotting routes between classes, planning his academic assault. "You don't have to master everything before you arrive, Ms. Chen reminded him as they drove to the new apartment. But Lucas couldn't help himself. After years of intellectual starvation, he was facing a feast and wanted to taste everything he knew. Apartments smelled like fresh paint and possibility. 2 bedrooms with actual doors, a kitchen where all the appliances worked, a small balcony overlooking a park where children played without fear, and Lucas's mother stood in the center of it, spinning slowly. "Don't deserve this," she said, and Lucas took her hand gently. "Mom," he said, using his 7-year-old voice to carry adult wisdom, "Grandmother would say we don't get what we deserve, we get what we fight for, and now we fight to keep." Angela started treatment the next day, a program Dr. Winters had recommended that specialized in addiction, rooted in trauma, and Lucas went with her for the intake session, watching his mother finally tell the truth about 20 years of running from pain while she attended her first group therapy session. Lucas met with Whitmore's transition counselor, a young man named David Kim, who'd been a scholarship student himself 10 years earlier and understood the culture shock Lucas was about to receive. "Academic part will be easy for you, David," said, reviewing Lucas's test scores, but Whitmore is also about connections, traditions, and unwritten rules that wealthy kids absorb from birth and scholarship. Students have to learn through trial and error. He explained how systems and social hierarchies, lunch procedures that assumed everyone had unlimited meal accounts, sports that required expensive equipment, and private coaching, and Lucas absorbed it all, filing away information like his grandmother must have filed patents. "But you have something they don't," David added, "real hunger, not for food, but for knowledge, for achievement, for proving yourself, and that hunger will carry you further than their comfort ever could if you don't let them make you feel." Small Lucas thought about Tyler Richardson, about years of being made to feel small, and nodded he'd survived Riverside Elementary by hiding, but Whitmore would require a different strategy. Selective revelation rather than complete concealments. Chen visited daily, bringing Chinese lessons and advanced mathematics, keeping Lucas sharp, while his mother navigated early recovery, and in the evenings, the three of them would eat dinner together like the family they'd become through choice rather than blood. An evening, Ms. Chen brought news. The investigation into Richardson Industries had expanded. 3 former employees had come forward with evidence of systematic patent theft dating back decades, Elizabeth Yang's name appearing repeatedly in suppressed documents there, saying James Richardson built his empire on stolen innovation. Ms. Chen said, and some of those innovations could still belong to the Yang family estate, which means, Lucas, they could belong to you and your mother. Lucas felt the weight of that possibility, but also its danger. Money had destroyed his family once, and he'd seen what the pursuit of it had done to the Richardsons, but justice, that was different. Justice was his grandmother's ghost, finally being heard. "Don't want to be rich," Lucas said carefully. "I want them to admit what they did. Want grandmother's name on her work. Want them to stop doing it to others." And Ms. Chen smiled because at 7 Lucas understood what many adults never did. His mother was listening from her bedroom doorway, and Lucas saw something shift in her expression. "She doesn't want money either," Angela said, stepping into the room. "She wants her mother back." "What's those 20 years back? But since we can't have that, maybe truth is in Oth week." Before Whitmore's term began, Lucas received his uniform package. Navy blazer with the academy crest, pressed white shirts, striped tie, and leather shoes that fit properly. For the first time in his life, he stood before the mirror, barely recognizing himself. "You look like a Whitmore student," his mother said from behind him, and Lucas heard both pride and worry in her voice, because looking the part and belonging were different things, and she knew how cruel children could be about different. "Saban, I'm still me," Lucas said, adjusting the tie. Ms. Chen had taught him to not still. "Grandmother's grandson, still your son, just with better armor," and Angela hugged him carefully, as if he might disappear like everything good in her life always had. The weekend before school started, David Kim invited Lucas to campus for orientation, and Ms. Chen drove them through neighborhoods that grew progressively wealthier until they reached Whitmore's gates, where security guards checked lists and landscaping looked like arts. Campus sprawled like a small university buildings, connected by covered walkways, libraries plural that looked like cathedrals, science labs that would make hospitals envious, and students walking with the easy confidence of those who'd never wondered where their next meal would come from. Lucas felt himself shrinking until David said quietly, "Look again, but differently. See the scholarship students were about 30% now, and they moved differently, purposefully, hungrily," and Lucas began to recognize his tribe. In the orientation session, he met other scholarship recipients: Maria from Honduras, who'd taught herself calculus from YouTube videos, James from Detroit, who'd built computers from discarded parts, Amy from rural Kentucky, who'd read every book in her county library twice. They sized each other up with the careful assessment of survivors, recognizing shared experiences in worn shoes hidden by new uniforms, in the way they hoarded orientation snacks, in careful note-taking that suggested nothing would be taken for granted. Session leader, a senior named Elizabeth, who made Lucas's heart skip because of the name, talked about Whitmore's history, its traditions, its expectations, but also its evolution. "We're not the same school we were 20 years ago," she said, looking directly at the scholarship students. "You're not guests here, you belong after orientation." David walked Lucas through campus, showing him shortcuts and quiet study spots. The best times to use the computer labs, which teachers genuinely cared about students versus which ones were just collecting prestigious paychecks, in the main library. Lucas stopped breathing for a moment, because there on a wall of distinguished alumni was a small plaque he'd never expected to see: Elizabeth Yang, class of 1975, revolutionary solar energy researcher, and beside it, a note recently updated pioneering. Work in photovoltaic selves was here, Lucas whispered, and David nodded. She was brilliant even then, made waves, challenged professors, started a science club for women that still exists today, and Lucas felt his grandmother's presence like a hand on his shoulder. They ended the tour at the dining hall where David bought Lucas lunch despite his protests and explained meal plans. Scholarship students get full coverage, he said, but you'll need to budget for extras, social events, club fees, the hidden costs they don't mention. Lucas ate slowly, savoring food that wasn't charity or scraped together, and thought about his mother and therapy, about Ms. Chen preparing lessons, about his grandmother's work, finally being recognized, about Tyler Richardson, who'd have to face him as an equal that night. He found his mother on the balcony of their new apartment, looking at stars visible now that they'd left Riverside smog, and she was crying, but they seemed like different tears than usual, clean somehow. Like rain after drought. Proud of you, she said when he joined her. So proud it physically hurts because I see her and you see what I could have been if I'd been stronger, but mostly I see who you are, Lucas Yang, and that's enough. That's everything. Luke leaned against her, feeling her solidity for the first time in memory. She was 40 days sober now, the longest stretch he'd ever known, and while he didn't trust it yet, he wanted to hope that breaking one cycle might help break others tomorrow would bring new challenges. The first day at Whitmore, where he'd walk halls his grandmother had walked, faced descendants of those who'd stolen from her, learned alongside children who'd never known hunger or hiding or shame, but tonight he had this, his mother, sober and present, their safe apartment with doors that locked and lights that worked, Ms. Chen's lessons filling his mind, and his grandmother's legacy finally acknowledged on Whitmore's walls. Lucas Yang, 7 years old, scholarship recipient and keeper of revolutionary dreams, was ready to stop hiding, ready to shine, ready to show them all that brilliance could bloom anywhere, even in the cracks of concrete where others saw only poverty. If the Richardsons didn't like it, well, they should have thought of that before they built their empire on stolen foundations, because truth, like solar energy, had a way of breaking through even the darkest clouds. Eventually, the first day at Whitmore Academy arrived, wrapped in morning mist and possibility. Lucas adjusted his tie for the 10th time, while his mother watched from the doorway of his new room. She'd been up since 4 a.m., too nervous to sleep, but she was sober, and that made everything else bearable. Ms. Chen arrived to drive him, wanting to be part of this milestone, and Lucas sat in the back seat, watching Riverside fade into Whitmore, watching poverty give way to privilege, watching his old life transform into something unrecognizable yet somehow still his. Remember, she said, catching his eye in the rearview mirror, you are not there to become them. You are there to become yourself, the best version of Lucas Yang, and he nodded, though his stomach churned. With more than first-day nerves, the Whitmore gates seemed taller today's students, streaming through in clusters of established friendship, and Lucas noticed how they moved differently than Riverside kids. No checking over shoulders, no protective hunching, just the easy flow of those who'd never been prey. Found his assigned house, Blue Ridge, and his advisor, Mr. Jameson, a chemistry teacher with kind eyes, who'd been briefed on Lucas's situation. Your grandmother was in my house, he said quietly. When she was here, we still have her science fair trophy, and the Casa. Lucas's first class was advanced mathematics, and he'd worried about being the youngest. But Whitmore had several accelerated students, and his age drew less attention than his obvious scholarship status. The new blazer that didn't quite hang right the way he clutched his supplius. Teacher Dr. Patel wrote an equation on the board that would have stumped high schoolers, and asked if anyone could solve it. Lucas hesitated, remembering Ms. Chen's advice about selective revelation, but then thought of his grandmother never hiding her brilliance. Raised his hand, the only one, and walked to the board, solving the equation with steady strokes, showing his work the way Miss Chen had taught him. And when he turned around, the room was silent, but Dr. Patel was smiling. Excellent work, Mr. Yang, she said. Where did you study before Whitmore? And Lucas said simply, my grandmother taught me through her friend, and it was true enough, though it didn't capture janitor closets and hidden lessons. At lunch, he found the other scholarship students, Maria, James, and Amy, who'd claimed a table near the windows, and Lucas joined them, grateful for familiar faces in a sea of privilege. They compared morning experiences, sharing small victories and confusions. Food was overwhelming in its abundance and quality. Lucas took modest portions, remembering David Kim's advice about not appearing too eager, but Maria laughed and loaded his plate. Fuller. We earned this, she said. Every bite, every opportunity. Halfway through lunch, Tyler Richardson entered the dining hall, and Lucas tensed, but Tyler looked different somehow. Smaller, despite his expensive clothes. Older, despite being only 9, and when their eyes met, Tyler looked away. First, it's been weird since his dad got arrested, James whispered. Apparently the FBI raided their offices last week. Something about patent fraud going back decades, and Lucas kept his expression neutral, though his heart raced because justice was moving faster than he'd dared. Hope Afternoon brought English literature, where Lucas discovered that his years of hiding had cost him some cultural knowledge, references to vacations in Europe, skiing terminology, casual mentions of trust funds and estate planning that flew over his head. But when they discussed the assigned reading, a novel about identity and belonging, Lucas found his voice talking about masks people wear, about the difference between surviving and living, about how poverty shaped perspective in ways wealth couldn't. Understand? The teacher, Mrs. Wellington, listened intently. Then, said Mr. Yang, that's a remarkably mature analysis for someone your age. And Lucas almost laughed, because maturity was just another word for having your childhood stolen by circumstance. For school, Ms. Chen picked him up, eager to hear everything, and Lucas recounted each class, each interaction, each moment of feeling both out of place and exactly where he belonged. And she nodded, understanding the complexity of his emotional geography at home. His mother was 60 days sober now and had prepared dinner, actual cooked food, not takeout or microwave meals, and they ate together, discussing his day like a normal family, whatever normal meant for a recovering addict, her genius son, and their adopted Chinese grandmother. That evening, Lucas tackled homework that would have challenged students twice his age, but his mind was still spinning from the day, from walking halls where his grandmother had walked, from solving equations she might have solved, from claiming space in her Ligusius. Mother knocked on his door, holding a box he'd never seen before. I found this in storage, she said. It was your grandmother's. From her Whitmore days. I thought you might want it. And Lucas opened it with trembling hands. Inside were notebooks filled with his grandmother's handwriting, early versions of theories that would later be stolen, photographs of her with classmates, including one where she stood proud and young, holding a science trophy, and a letter addressed to her future grandchildren. If you're reading this, the letter began, then I'm gone, but my dreams don't have to be. And Lucas read through tears about her hopes, her struggles, her belief that knowledge was the only inheritance that couldn't be stolen. At the bottom of the box was something that made him gasp. A prototype solar cell, crude by modern standards, but revolutionary for its time, with documentation proving it predated Richardson's first patent by 3 years. Clear evidence of theft. Lucas said, we have to give this to the lawyers, and Angela nodded. But she was looking at the photographs at her mother, young and brilliant and full of hope. Before Richardson destroyed everything, before Angela destroyed herself. I'm going to get better, she said quietly. Not just sober, but better. Going to finish my degree. Maybe going to stop wasting the mind she gave me, because you're right, Lucas. We don't get what we deserve, we get what we fight for. Next morning at Whitmore, Lucas walked taller, knowing he carried more than books in his backpack. He carried evidence, history, proof that his family's brilliance had been real enough to steal. And that was a twisted kind of validation in chemistry class. Mr. Jameson assigned lab partners, and Lucas was paired with a girl named Sarah, whose last name he didn't catch until she said Sarah Richardson, Tyler's sister. And Lucas felt the universe's dark sense of humor at work. She must have seen his expression, because she quickly added, I'm adopted, she said, different from Tyler, from all of them. Really? And I'm sorry for what my family did to yours. Tyler told me everything after the investigation started. Lucas studied her, seeing sincerity in her eyes, and made a choice that would have been impossible weeks ago. It's not your fault, he said. Sins aren't inherited, only opportunities to do better. And Sarah smiled gratefully, worked well together. Sarah's methodical approach, complementing Lucas's intuitive leaps, and by the end of class, they'd completed an experiment that usually took twice as long. Mr. Jameson noted their partnership with Apraval at lunch. Tyler approached Lucas's table alone, his usual crew nowhere in sight, and stood awkwardly until Lucas nodded at an empty chair. Tyler sat looking miserable and younger than his 9 years, despite the expensive haircut. Me dad's going to prison, he said quietly. They found evidence going back 20 years, including what he did to your grandmother. And Lucas waited, saying nothing, because sometimes silence was the only appropriate response. Sorry, Tyler continued, doesn't fix anything, doesn't bring her back, doesn't give you those years, but I'm sorry, and maybe you could help me understand how to be different than him. And Lucas saw real pain, real desire to break the cycle. Sarah's different, Lucas said. She's kind, smart, worthy of the Richardson name in ways your father never was. Maybe start there, learn from her instead of him. And Tyler nodded gratefully, as if Lucas's forgiveness mattered more than he could express. That afternoon, Lucas received a note to see the headmaster and walked to the office, wondering if his scholarship was somehow in jeopardy. But Dr. Morrison greeted him warmly, gesturing to articles spread across his desk. Myung, she said, I've been following your family's story, the investigation, the recovered patents, the truth finally coming to light, and I want you to know that Whitmore stands with you. Your grandmother's legacy deserves recognition. Showed him plans for a new scholarship in Elizabeth Yang's name for students interested in sustainable energy, funded partially by damages from the Richardson lawsuit. And Lucas felt his grandmother's presence like sunlight through window. Swed like you to speak at the announcement ceremony, Dr. Morrison said. Your story, your family's story, is one of resilience and brilliance, triumphing over theft and adversity. And Lucas thought about his mother getting better, about Ms. Chen keeping promises, about justice finally arriving. He said, I'll speak for my grandmother, for my mother, for everyone who's been told their dreams don't matter because they're poor. And Dr. Morrison smiled approvingly, already reaching for her phone to set preparations in motion. That night, Lucas sat with his mother and Ms. Chen, planning what he would say, how he would honor the past while building the future, and Angela was 90 days sober, now clear-eyed and contributing ideas with the intelligence she'd buried for so long. Going to change the world, Ms. Chen said, all of you together, going to finish what Elizabeth started, and Lucas believed her because he'd learned that change came not from individual brilliance, but from communities of care, from chosen families, from truth told bravely. The announcement ceremony was scheduled for 3 weeks out, giving Lucas time to prepare, but also time to witness the Richardson empire crumbling in real time. Every day brought new revelations, companies demanding compensation, inventors coming forward, journalists connecting dots that painted James Richardson as a serial thief of innovation. Lucas tried to focus on his studies, but the weight of upcoming speech pressed on him. How could a 7-year-old capture 20 years of injustice? In words, how could he honor his grandmother without becoming a symbol of revenge? And Ms. Chen, understanding his struggle, offered wisdom. Speak from here, she said, touching his heart, not from anger or pain, but from love for what your grandmother created, for what your mother survived, for what you're building. And Lucas nodded, though the words still wouldn't come. Meet Whitmore. He found unexpected allies. Sarah Richardson proved to be brilliant in her own right, untainted by her adoptive family's greed, and she worked with Lucas on chemistry projects that pushed both their boundaries, showing that collaboration beat competition. Tyler, too, was changing the investigation, had stripped away his arrogance, leaving a boy desperate to understand how his father had become so corrupted. He followed Lucas not as a bully, but as someone seeking redemption, though he didn't know what that looked like. Me. Whole life is built on lies, Tyler said one afternoon, as they waited for their rides. Everything we have, the house, the cars, the company, it all came from stealing from people like your grandmother. And Lucas heard genuine anguish in his voice. You're 9 years old, Lucas replied. You didn't steal anything, and now you get to choose whether to continue the pattern or break it. Sarah broke it by being kind. You can break it by being honest about what happened, by making sure it never happens again. That evening, Lucas found his mother in their living room, surrounded by law books and course catalogs. She'd enrolled in online classes to finish her degree, and was studying with the intensity of someone making up for lost time. Her 95 days of sobriety showing in her clear focus. You want to be a patent lawyer, she said. When Lucas asked about her choices, want to help protect people like your grandmother from people like Richardson, want to use the law as a shield instead of watching it be used as a weapon. Lucas felt pride swell in his chest, because his mother was becoming who she might have been all along, brilliant and driven, just temporarily derailed by trauma, and watching her rebuild gave him hope that broken things could be mended. Adams Chen visited daily, now officially retired from janitor work, thanks to a settlement from Whitmore for years of underemployment despite her qualifications, and she spent her time tutoring other struggling students, creating more sanctuaries for hidden brilliancy. In afternoon, she brought news that changed everything. The Patent Review Board had made its decision. Elizabeth Yang would be posthumously recognized as the primary inventor of 12 major innovations in solar technology, patents that Richardson Industries had claimed for 2 decades. Furthermore, the board stated damages would be paid to the Yang estate, and licensing fees for all products using the stolen technology would generate ongoing income enough to ensure Lucas and his mother would never know poverty again. But it was the last part that made Lucas cry. Elizabeth Yang's name would be added to all products retroactively, and going forward, meaning millions of solar panels around the world would bear his grandmother's name. Her legacy finally visibly. His mother sobbed when they told her, not sad tears but cleansing ones, as if 20 years of poison was finally leaving her system. She did it, she kept saying. She won. Even dead she won. And Lucas understood they all had it. Whitmore. The news spread quickly, and reactions varied. Some students distanced themselves from the Richardsons, while others showed support for Tyler and Sarah, who bore family shame for crimes they didn't commit. Sarah found Lucas after chemistry class, tears in her eyes. I'm glad, she said fiercely. Glad the truth came out. Glad your grandmother is getting credit. Glad my father is going to prison, because living a lie is worse than any punishment. Ishimukas impulsively hugged her, this girl who shared a name with his tormentors, but had shown only kindness. And Sarah hugged back, both of them understanding that justice didn't require cruelty, that healing happened through connection, not isolation. Speech began to form in his mind. Not as words yet, but as feeling, as the story of 3 generations of Yang women and one small boy who'd inherited their brilliance, their pain, their dreams, and their ultimate triumph. His mother reached 100 days sober, and they celebrated with Ms. Chen at a real restaurant, not fancy, but clean and bright, where they didn't have to count pennies or share entrees. And Lucas watched his mother laugh, really laugh, for the first time. He could remember that night she showed him acceptance letters from 3 universities offering her spots in their pre-law programs, and Lucas realized she'd been studying for months, preparing applications in secret, not wanting to disappoint him if she failed. But you didn't fail, Lucas said. You're brilliant, Mom, you always were, just got lost for a while. And Angela cried again. But these were tears of possibility, of futures reopening, of second chances seized with both hands. At school, Lucas's academic performance drew increasing attention, teachers recommending him for advanced programs, universities sending early recruitment materials, and Dr. Morrison suggesting he might graduate years early if he maintained his pace. But Lucas wasn't in a hurry. Any more poverty had made him desperate to grab opportunities before they vanished. But security let him choose thoughtfully, and he chose to stay with his cohort to build friendships. To have the childhood his circumstances had, Stolen Sarah became his regular lab partner. Their work drawing praise and publication offers, and Tyler slowly earned a place at their lunch table, learning to use his privilege for good, starting with advocating for better scholarship support. Richardson Company was being dissolved, its assets liquidated to pay damages, and Tyler and Sarah would inherit nothing but their adoptive mother's modest personal savings. And Lucas watched Tyler discover who he was without wealth, finding surprising strength. He want to study law too, Tyler announced one day, like Lucas's mom, but prosecution not defense. Want to put away people who steal ideas, who destroy families, who think money makes them untouchable. And Lucas saw his grandmother's fight continuing in unexpected ways. 3 days before the ceremony, Lucas finally wrote his speech in one long outpouring of truth. About grandmother he'd never met, mother who'd survived himself, who'd hidden in Ms. Chen, who'd kept promises no one would have enforced. He'd wrote about janitor closets transformed into sanctuaries, about lessons taught by candlelight, about a puppy's worth measured against a human life, about Tyler learning his whole life was built on lies, about Sarah proving family was about choice, not blood. But mostly he wrote about hope, about brilliant minds surviving poverty, about communities forming around shared struggle, about justice arriving late but undeniable, about 7-year-olds who could change the world if someone just believed in them. Chen cried when she read it. His mother had to take breaks every few paragraphs, and even Dr. Morrison wiped her eyes when Lucas practiced in her office, but they all agreed it was perfect. True necessareth night before the ceremony. Lucas couldn't sleep, standing on the balcony looking at stars invisible from Riverside, and his mother joined him, robe wrapped tight against the cold, both of them understanding tomorrow would mark a turning point. Would have been so proud, Angela said, of both of us, of how we survived, of how we're thriving, of how her work will help millions of people have clean energy. She won Lucas in every way that matters. Lucas leaned against his mother, feeling her solidity, her sobriety, her determination, and knew that tomorrow he would stand before hundreds and tell their story. Not for sympathy, but for change. Not for revenge, but for justice. Because Elizabeth Yang deserved to have her name spoken with respect. Angela Yang deserved to reclaim her brilliant mind. Lucas Yang deserved to shine without hiding, and Ms. Chen deserved recognition for keeping a promise that saved him. Alan, somewhere in whatever existed beyond James Richardson, was learning that stolen foundations always crumble eventually, that truth has patience exceeding any lie, that brilliant women have brilliant grandchildren who refuse to let theft have the final word. Tomorrow Lucas would speak for all of them, for everyone whose ideas were stolen, whose potential was dismissed, whose poverty was used against them, and his words would carry the weight of truth, the power of survival, the promise of justice. But tonight, he just stood with his mother under stars that didn't care about rich or poor, and felt grateful for this moment, for her presence, for their chance to rebuild what was broken, to honor what was lost, to create what would last. Becos Elizabeth Yang's greatest invention wasn't solar cells or patents, it was the resilient brilliance she passed to her daughter and grandson, a light no Richardson could steal, an inheritance that multiplied when shared, a legacy written not in law but in lives transformed.